Well, thank you for everyone for making some time for us today. This is a value-added webinar, so I really appreciate you taking time out. I want to introduce my friend Jim Goodrich. I've known Jim for a very long time. God, I think 14 years now, Jim. And he is my go-to person whenever I have appraisal questions or whatnot, just professionally. So if any of y'all have clients that need appraisal advice as well, he's your guy. And PropertyTax.io is a service that him and Glenn, who will be introduced here in a second, have founded to help us and help you keep your assessed value as low as possible to save you money on your property taxes. And right now, with how the economy is, I think every dollar that we can keep in our pocket would go a long way for us. And it's just a different environment right now with COVID of your ability to protest successfully. So I thought that this would be good to loop them in and see if we can't add some value for you right now. Okay. So Jim, I'll kick it over to you and let you take it from here.
Thank you, Wade. It's a pleasure, and I really appreciate you partnering with us. As Wade said, we've known each other for a number of years. I've done many appraisals for Wade over the years for his company, and proud to say that Wade has did our home loan, and I think about you every time I put stamps on the envelope, Wade, because we have that return address thing that has Wade Betz on it. So
there we go.
That's a great giveaway. This is mostly going to be about property tax, but in this market right now, everybody is wanting to know where we are and where we're going in the market. And since we also have a valuation company, we thought we would share just a little bit of market knowledge right now before we kick it off to Glenn, and then the remainder of it's going to be on the property tax. So I'm going to see if I can share a screen here for you. Let's see. Glenn, is that sharing anything yet?
Yes.
There you go.
You see the graph there, the showing time graph?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So let's look at this real quickly. This is a graph from when the real estate agents book showings on property. They go through a central agency called Showing Time, and that company books all the showings. So they've got a lot of data that is very interesting to look at these days, because most of the showings, I would say 95% of the showings in the Dallas area at least go through Showing Time. So this is a graph. It's a little bit different graph than a lot of you are used to seeing. It's an index graph, which means it starts out at 0 over here at January 1st, and then it goes up or down percentage-wise as we progress through the years. And this is for the state of Texas. And so I want you to look at right now just the blue line. Just the blue line, ignore the tan line. We'll get back to that. That's a much more interesting graph. But the blue line starts out at 0, January 1st. That doesn't mean there were no showings. That just means it's comparing itself to January 1st. And so it would always be 0. And then as you progress through the year, we get through the middle of January, then February, on into March. You see that this blue line is just crescendoing up to the top right here, then it dips down. I think this was Easter week right here, and then it continued out, and we don't have the rest of the year, but it would continue building through the summer and then start to decline again in August and September. That would be a normal graph for that, for the year. And as you can see, if we now look at the tan line, it started out the year pretty much following the blue line, just a little bit above it the whole ways. And it looked like it peaked up here about March the 10th or 11th, and then we all know what happened, and we look at what happened here. So in about a 2-week period from the middle of March to the end of March, the showing activity dropped about 42% from where it was in January. And of course, January is typically the slowest time, so that's a huge drop. But the interesting part is, at the end of the month, it started to turn, and now, May 4th, here's the 0 point right here. We're actually about 19% above where we were the first week in January. So that's great news in terms of the trend. We should be doing better. If you look at last year, it was up about 30% from the first of the year. So that's where we would like to be. It looks like we're getting there very quickly. And if anybody wants to take bets on, those two lines going to cross in the next 2 weeks, I would say they probably will. So we'll see what's around the corner, but we are starting to see a lot of activity out there in the marketplace in terms of buyers getting into the market. So Wade, I will send you this. I think I already
Please.
have, if I'm not mistaken, and you can send it out to your people if you'd like to. And let me see if I can get this other graph here, and we'll talk about that for a minute, and then we'll go to Glenn. All right, Glenn, do you see the different graph there now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is another graph. I'm not going to spend much time on this. I did this for a realtor group, but I thought it might be interesting for you guys too. One of the things that we look at when doing our market analysis as appraisers is we look at the number of pending sales versus the total number of listings out there. And from that, we get what's called a hotness factor. And a hotness factor is just a percent. And I'll give you an example. For example, if the hotness factor was 50%, that would mean that half of the inventory out there has already got a contract on it. That's a very strong market at 50%. Normal market is more like 25 to 35%. So in a normal market, we can expect that hotness factor to be about 30%, 35%, somewhere in that range, which means about a third of the inventory is taken. When it starts to get up to 50% and above, it gets to be a pretty hot market. And you have, at that point, multiple offers and people paying more than list price. And we've all seen, the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a lot of that, especially in the lower price ranges. So I thought it was interesting to look at what was the hotness factor a year ago in various markets and what is it now. So if we look over here at the far right column, the yellow is last year and the blue is this year. So for example, if you're in Plano and you have a house in the 400s, last year 33% of the houses were pending at this time, and now 34%, so almost identical. We'll skip down a few to Frisco. Frisco in the $300,000 to $400,000 price range. Again, 38% were pending last year and 38% pending this year. That might be surprising to some people. We go down to Allen, and I drop down in the price range just to give you a different perspective. Let's look in the $200,000 price range. Last year, amazingly, 66% of the inventory was already pending. So if you were a buyer, you would have a hard time finding a house last year. This year, in that same price range, it's still extremely strong at 59%. So why do we look at this? What are the takeaways? There's two things really. The first column right here is the listings, by the way, and I won't go through these one by one, but if you look at the percentages here, the listing volumes are off about 30%. So the volume of the market has shrunk about 30%. And Wade and I were talking about that before the webinar started. So you're seeing that affects real estate agents, it affects lenders like Wade, title companies, anybody that deals in transaction volume. Your volume is off big time. Looking back at the chart we just looked at a minute ago, it looks like that's gonna start changing. The other thing we look at is the supply and demand. What is happening to pricing? So just because volume is contracting doesn't mean anything's happening to prices, because those are two independent variables. Over the years, I've learned that the best predictor of where prices are going is to look at that hotness factor that we just looked at. And if you see a hotness factor starting to tighten and get higher, you're going to have upward pressure on values. And if you see that hotness factor dropping, it's starting to turn into a buyer's market, and you're going to see prices drop a little bit. Right now, we're just not seeing that. So it looks to be, although the volume is much less, the buyers and the sellers have both contracted in equal proportions. So that's where we are right now. We'll see what happens around the corner. And there's been a lot of talk about people just automatically assume that, hey, with the COVID, my value's depressed, and therefore that ought to affect my property taxes. So Glenn, this is probably the main question that's on most people's mind, I know you're going to cover this, but I'm just going to ask you up front. What is the COVID going to do to property tax values this year? And let me unshare this screen and be interested to see your answer to that question.
Yeah, I think, if you're okay, Wade, I'll just go ahead and jump into my presentation, because I think that's exactly what I cover right off the bat.
Go for it.
Okay. All right. Can you guys see this okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I kind of divided, this is tracking the Dow Jones Industrial Average starting in January 1st of this year. I mean, actually going from 1 year back. So starting in May of 2019. And what we really kind of are living in is two different worlds. You've got the appraisal district that's in this green box up here. Whoops, that's my last slide. You've got the appraisal district that's in this box right up here, this green box, where we're in good times economically, unemployment low, wages were stable, kind of high. And then all of a sudden COVID happened, and you're starting to see layoffs, people asking to take reduced wages, just all kinds of economic indicators that make people feel uneasy at best, and some people even panicky a little bit. And if you've lost your job, then obviously this is a very bad time for you. So even though the real estate market, like Jim was covering, we haven't really seen it play out yet, the sentiment out there is very anxious. And we're seeing that a lot just because of a lot of indicators that are out there. I know that cities are really concerned about budgets, things like that. And so really the question is, okay, well, how is this going to impact my property tax values? The answer to that question is the appraisal districts have to value the property on January 1st of the year. And that's not them being strict. That's actually the law that they have to follow. There's some implications. So I have this big line right here. This represents January 1st, and that's why the appraisal district is living in this world of good times. So they're going to pull all their information for valuation during this green box time. And so you should expect values to go up. Some area, if you're in certain appraisal districts, you've already gotten notices. Some appraisal districts like Collin and Dallas, they're still waiting to get notices out. And so we do expect values to increase in general. I'll cover this in a little bit, but I know that Tarrant did not increase values, but there's kind of a little asterisk by that I'm going to get into. So this is what happened in Harris County. They were the first ones to really put their values out. And so we got a really good kind of crystal ball into how a major county in the appraisal in Texas would handle appraisals. They increased on median by 4%, and then some areas even saw over 15% increase in median value for residential property. And keep in mind, they were dealing with oil concerns on top of that, with oil just dropping tremendously. And so in the face of all of that, on top of everything else, they still increased values. Tarrant shows a 0% median percent change in residential value for 2020, and here's where the asterisks come in, there's a 4% value change in the appraised value. If you're wondering what the difference between market value and appraised value is, you can join the club of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in Texas that are confused about that, probably even millions. The market value reflects what the appraisal district will sell the property for on January 1st. So that's what they're telling you that they think that the property would sell for on January 1st, what the value is on January 1st. The appraised value it only really applies for homestead properties, and there's some agricultural properties that get involved with that as well. But for simplicity's sake, if you have a homestead exemption on your property, then your appraised value can only increase by a maximum of 10% a year. There's some caveats to that I'm not really going to get into for this presentation. Like if you add a pool or something like that, it can go up by more than 10%. But in general, the appraised value can only go up by 10%. So what we saw happen in Tarrant County was they did not increase the market value, but because they were so aggressive with values last year, you're seeing an automatic increase in the appraised values of plus 4%. So what does that translate to into tax bills? Well, your taxable values are based on the appraised value. So if the appraised value goes up, that means your tax bill is going to go up. So even though Tarrant County did not increase market values this year, because they were so aggressive with market values last year, they're kind of playing catch up this year with appraised values. The appraised values have gone up by positive 4%. So people in Tarrant County, even though your market value hasn't gone up, you should still expect a higher tax bill if your appraised value went up. I do show that Rockwall Appraisal District had they increased values by about 4%. And sorry, I don't have nice, pretty charts and graphs for the other counties. Since Harris was so early to get their data out, I had a little time to kill. And so I went a little crazy with mapping in Harris County, but I will catch up and provide nice maps for Tarrant and Rockwall when I get a little breather. But Rockwall did increase values by 3%. So I'm just hammering home the point that values are going up, even though we're in kind of that red box at the beginning of the slide that shows that we're below the, that we're in hard economic times according to, the Dow Industrial Index, which, that's not the indicator for the economy, but it's just kind of a nice visual representation of what the angst in the market is doing right now. And in the face of all that, we're having increased values, which means we're going to have increased tax bills when we're going to be in a likely recession. To throw a ring, to kind of add even more complexity into this, cities and ISDs are really worried about budgets. I've seen a bunch of headlines, and I do see some question and answers that are coming in. I will get to those. So I'm going to read over these kind of when I get done, maybe while Jim and Wade are talking a little bit, and then I'll kind of come back and answer some of those. So please keep sending those in, and we'll look over those and get those answered. So cities and budgets are worried about, or cities and ISDs are worried about their budgets. There's a lot of headlines you see for that. How that's going to translate into your tax bill is a kind of a question mark, but there is a provision in Senate Bill 2, which was passed last year. And Senate Bill 2 is huge. We could do a whole webinar on that, and we probably have a lot less participants if we're talking about Senate Bill 2, because it's kind of a wonky conversation. But the takeaway for you guys that has a real impact on your tax bills is that there's provisions in Senate Bill 2 that that's going to be debated. This is not set in stone. This is not final, but I can foresee, or I'm predicting that there are going to be some debates about this and maybe some legal challenges. That there's provisions in Senate Bill 2 that really were put in there for situations like Hurricane Harvey that talk about disaster relief. But since Governor Abbott declared a statewide quote unquote disaster, like actually did declare a disaster and requested federal funds and received federal funds for the disaster, the economic disaster, I predict that there will be some taxing jurisdictions that interpret that as a disaster. And what that allows them to do is they can increase their tax rates at a steeper rate without seeking voter approval. So what Senate Bill 2 did was it limited the tax rate increase to 2.5% for ISDs and 3.5% for cities and counties. Senate Bill 2, if a disaster is declared with its intent, like a flood, like Hurricane Harvey, then they could have increased their tax rates up by 8% without seeking voter approval. I do think that there's a legitimate conversation being had right now about if the economic disaster covers that. And the language is kind of broad in Senate Bill 2, and it did things like exclude things like a drought. So it had the foresight to exclude things like a drought, but it didn't have the foresight to exclude things like an economic disaster. So I'm just kind of painting the picture that at a minimum, keep in mind that they can increase the tax rate by 2.5% for ISDs and 3.5% without seeking voter approval. So I do think we could reasonably expect higher tax rates, but there is a vulnerability that they could potentially go up even higher than that without seeking voter approval. And I think given the headlines that we've seen and that the quote unquote good times are over, or there's a sense that it could be over. Jim showed some information earlier on about how the real estate market may not be really being impacted by this. But if you're a taxing jurisdiction, you may not want to chance that, and you may just try to grab as much as you can while it's on the table in preparation for rougher times ahead. So I'm saying all that because this year is especially important to pay attention to your property tax, because we've already seen in a lot of places that there's increasing property values. I've just talked about how you might have increasing tax rates. This is for sure happening. Wages are falling and unemployment is rising. I know Glenn Hager, our comptroller, Texas comptroller, is touting right now that they think that unemployment in Texas will be in the low double digits, and that we're already in a recession, that we're just not, it's not on the books yet, but we'll be sliding into a recession. And so what that means is that people will probably be getting higher tax bills during a recession. And so we really need to be paying attention to our property taxes this year. The most direct impact that you have on your tax bill is protesting the appraisal district's value. We have a philosophy of how we approach doing that. We say, do it the right way. Make a decision maker's job easy to reduce the value, or easier to reduce the value. And when I say decision maker, there's two kinds of decision makers in the appeal process. There's an appraisal district appraiser, because if you file an appeal, let's say that you do an online appeal, you file the appeal, the appraisal district appraiser can offer you to reduce the value. So they're a decision maker. They can decide to lower the value, and you can accept it and resolve the case that way. If you don't get that offer, or if they offer you something that's too high and you don't like it, then you can go on to this second set of decision makers, which is called the Appraisal Review Board. Sometimes you hear it called the ARB. So the ARB is the Appraisal Review Board. And those are just regular tax-paying citizens like you and me. They're not employed by the appraisal district. They're independent of the appraisal district. And there's, they can just be pretty much any everyday citizen can serve on the ARB. If you work for a government entity like a school or a city, then you're excluded from being on the ARB because of conflict of interest. So I'm saying all that because the ARB, a lot of people get intimidated by the ARB, the Appraisal Review Board, because it's kind of this formal setting. Even I get nervous, and I've done these hundreds, thousands of times presented in front of ARBs, and even I still get nervous. But I'm here to tell you that these are just everyday people. They want to help you lower the value, but you need to do it. But you need to give them a good reason to do that, and the best way to do that is with credible evidence. And that's really where my company comes in, PropertyTax.io. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about from this point forward is how we solve the problems with property tax protest, and how we approach it. And so I don't want you to take away that, oh, you can only do this through PropertyTax.io. These are workflows that we have developed through years and years of doing it the old-fashioned way without technology, or with minimal technology. So if you don't want to use my product, or you don't want to go to my website, PropertyTax.io, and this information still applies to you. And I'll cover ways that you can do it without using our technology through here. So I don't want this to seem like it's just a big, huge commercial for what I do, but I demonstrate how we go about solving the protest evidence issue with our technology. But again, you can apply it without using the technology, and I'll go over some ways of doing that. And actually, I have some case studies that were inspired by people that didn't use our technology. I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to incorporate that into what we do. So in over 10 years of working with the appraisal districts, I've learned that they have a huge technological advantage. I don't know how many people out there have experienced this, but when I was presenting cases, I would get frustrated because I would present a set of evidence, some comps, something from MLS, and then they would just immediately take it and run it through their system. And then so they'd make all these adjustments to that comp that I wasn't making, and then the value would come out very different than I was expecting it to come out. And sometimes it would actually work against me to get a reduction. So that's kind of where I learned early on. And, I peruse, I graduated from Texas A&M University. So if you're on there and you're not from A&M, this isn't a big howdy or whoop moment. But if you are from A&M, whoop, howdy. But if you've ever been on TexAgs, it's really active in Harris County, but it's not so active up in Dallas County. So if you are from A&M, we need to get that fixed. We need to be more active on TexAgs with property tax issues. But there's this guy that posted on there that said that he had a house with the same floor plan in the same neighborhood, and it was noticed at $11,000 less than he was. And after the appraisal district went through all their adjustments, it made it almost equal to his house. So in other words, he thought that he could get a reduction, but after all the adjustments were made, it didn't end up happening. And so that's a very common story. I've experienced that personally. This guy's experienced that, and I know several other people that have. So I'm saying all that because the appraisal districts have systems that value property very differently than how a realtor may value a property, or even Jim that's on our Jim, the appraiser that's on this webinar, how he would value a property. They each have their own systems. The problem that we set out to solve was let's level the playing field with technology and ease of use. And so in just a few clicks of the mouse, that we made it easy to create evidence that was compliant with their system. So no more surprises, no more thinking I've got this comp that's going to help me that actually doesn't help me when they run it through their systems. And so for those of you that are dialed in right now, I'm showing some screenshots of evidence that we have, but you can go on our website and look at a sample report. Again, the website's www.PropertyTax.io. And I'm showing this report like this because you don't have to use our product to develop a packet of information that's like this, but we make it super easy and fast to do it. That's the value add that we have for that. Things that they want to look for, like, are specific adjustments. You know, where I think a lot of people go wrong when they think that they've got a property that's going to help them that doesn't help them is in a category called additional improvements. And each appraisal district will call that somewhat differently, but additional improvements include things like garages, you know, attached garages, covered porches. You'd be surprised at the value that some covered porches have, like $15,000 in value for some covered porches. These aren't numbers that I'm making up, and they just come from a system that they subscribe to and they have, and that they apply that system to everybody. And so there's just some hidden information on values that aren't even available directly on the websites that you have to get through several open records requests. And that's kind of what we've done, and what our evidence is based off of is that whole process. But okay, that sounds complex, but I'm here to tell you that there's a way that you can win this whole thing with just a very simple concept, is that you know your property better than anybody else, okay? So you can go beyond the appraisal district system and tell them something that they don't already know about your property, and all of a sudden you have flipped the advantage from them to you. The appraisal district is very database driven, and the reason why they're very database driven is because of fairness. You know, systems are fair, databases are fair, human judgment can be unfair. So, but there's things that their databases don't know about your property. And I'm going to go over a case study that I read about in the Dallas Morning News a couple of years ago. And the headline was, "Here's how I knocked $13,000 off my property tax appraisal in 30 minutes. This process is so easy, I'm vowing to do it every year." And to be clear, the author, her name's Leona Allen. She did not use PropertyTax.io, but I thought what she did was a good idea. And so I incorporated it as a workflow into our tool. So here's what she did. She filed a protest online, and she got a realtor friend to gather recent comparable sales for her. And then she went and got photos of recent sales from Zillow and Trulia. So she enhanced that information from the realtor with photos. And then in the hearing, the district appraiser lowered the value to the average of the recent sales that she brought in. Okay, so that sounds pretty simple. You know, it's really not that hard to get comps and go to Zillow or Trulia and get photos and you know, go to work. After having read this, there's several things that I would have done differently if I were handling the case, or if she were using our software, that she could have done better. But the bottom line is that she got a reduction for relatively easy amount of work. And what I don't want people to walk away from here thinking is that this is a very complex process, and Glenn's system is super complex, and you know, I need to do that. You know, so if you don't want to use my software, that's fine. But I want people to understand that you can create credible evidence for really not that much effort. I think that we happen to do it the best, but you know, there's good alternatives that are not that difficult to do. This is a video, so if you are dialed in, I apologize. I'm going to describe what's going on in the video, but you won't see. So this is what our tool is doing is you can pop open and you can use photos of the comps to say things like, this kitchen is nicer than my kitchen. So you're tagging a photo of the comp's kitchen. It's already built into the tool. And you're saying you can upload a photo of your kitchen to do a nice side-by-side comparison. And again, this is what I would recommend doing even if you weren't using our software. And then you would say, okay, it would cost me $25,000 to make my kitchen look this nice. And the result of that would be that you're now showing the appraisal district or a decision maker, maybe the appraisal review board, that you're disagreeing with the appraisal district's condition of your property when they compare it to this particular property, a comp, and you're showing photographic evidence of that. So that's kind of what Leona did, was she went and got comps, got the photos of the comps, and she probably walked through a process of, oh, this comp has updated. And maybe maybe it was just that they have nicer countertops than she did or something like that, but that still has value. You know, that's $5,000 in value. And it also gets the conversation outside of the database and focused on photographs, which kind of gives you more control over the narrative and what's being discussed in the hearing. This is just a screenshot of what that looks like. So, you know, this is how we produce it in our report. You can maybe go into Microsoft Word if you're just going to do Zulia or Trulia and get photos and kind of do a table, you know, do a 2-cell table and put the 2 photos next to each other and resize them and kind of put some comments about it, saying that my kitchen's not as nice as this, and you can see the basically give them a side-by-side view. Make it easy for them to compare what you're saying, your kitchen versus this kitchen. We also coach people through the process so that they feel empowered with the information to succeed. So we're more than just software. You have direct access to us to help you strategize. In fact, there was a guy that chatted in this morning. He said, oh, I'm new to your silver package, which is kind of our $75 package that you can do all the things that I was just demoing in the video, select comps, get the photos, things like that. And he was like, you know, would you mind looking over my evidence before I submit it to make sure that I'm not missing anything? And I said, sure, no problem, we'll do that. This is another story that inspired kind of me to look at our software in a different way. This was already baked in, but I'd never thought of looking at our software this way until this particular user had this experience. So the title of it is that comps pool only worth $4,000? Seems like I'm being valued too high based on a glitch in the system. And he was able to use this following evidence to kind of turn the appraisal district system on its head and win really big at the ARB hearing that he went to. So he was noticed at $448,000, and he went to our website and we said, you should probably be looking for a value closer to 425. So he filed his protest and he requested the appraisal district's evidence, and the appraisal district emailed him an offer at $441,000, and they provided 4 comps that they were using to value it at $441,000. So he goes to our website and enters in the appraisal district's comps that they selected. Notice how it equals exactly $441,000. And he noticed, okay, that comp that they used had a pool. So I'm going to go investigate because he didn't have a pool. And he saw, okay, they're valuing that pool at $12,000. And he goes to the photos and sees, okay, that pool looks like a lot more than $12,000 pool. So what he's doing here is making an adjustment and saying it's more like a $25,000 pool. So he's overriding their $12,000 adjustment, and that's decreasing their value, their own value that they presented. And he noticed that another comp had a pool. Again, he's paying attention to the pools because he does not have a pool. So he's like, what are the comps that don't have pools, and you know, why are they driving my value up high? And he noticed they were only valuing that one at $4,000. Like, there's no way that that's a $4,000 pool. Because this guy's in like a $450,000 neighborhood. They're nicer pools. If you're dialing in, these pictures are nice. And so he's basically decreasing their value every time he's overriding that adjustment. But he's like saying, okay, since the pools are issues, what if I just remove them altogether? And now he's focusing on the 2 comps that they provided that did not have pools, and he's getting their own. So they came in, they said, we're going to offer you $441,000. He's able to turn their appraisal district evidence on their head and only concentrate on the 2 comps that they provided that didn't have pools, and it's more like a value at $430,000. And so the ARB saw that and they were like, oh yeah, you're right. That's a very good argument that you're making. So this is kind of a screenshot of the chat that he had in. So we have a live chat system, and he chatted in after his hearing. He was kind of pumped up about it. He said, I got it reduced to $430,000 from $449,000. He said the tips about the pool made all the difference. And he said when he brought that issue up, the ARB pretty much stopped paying attention to anything else, and they focused on it. And so again, you know more about your property than you do sometimes, or than they do a lot of times. And you can look at the photos, and you can, you know, if their database doesn't make sense, if a $4,000 pool doesn't look like a $4,000 pool with the photos, use that to your advantage and kind of show that their database is making a mistake or has a glitch with it, and see if you can use that to exploit it and get the value lower. And this is what I thought was kind of a key takeaway, was the ARB quote unquote chair. So there's a chairman of the ARB, kind of like the person who runs the show in there. There's one point person. They call that person the chair. The chair actually thanked him for a concise presentation. And the owners were on a 0-7 losing streak before he went in there. And he said that without us in the report, that he doesn't think he could have done it. And so I bring up us and the report, because us is referencing our customer service and the report is the technology that we do. And so it's really a dual service that we do. It's the coaching and strategizing along with the actual report that you go in there to dispute the value. I think the takeaway from that, also from the ARB hearing, is a concise presentation. That's just kind of a good general thing. When you're in the ARB hearings, try to be to the point, because they're in there all day. They hear a lot of the same arguments over and over again. And so the more honed and focused you can be on what you want to talk about, the more that they're going to appreciate that. And actually, the more they're going to respect the arguments you're making. So 2020 is the year of the remote appeal, because there's not going to be any in-person processes this year because of the coronavirus. So that means that when we're in a remote situation, submitting credible evidence in an online protest with the appraisal districts is going to be key. That's what they're begging you to do. They're begging you to please use our online protest system to follow your appeal. If you go to help.propertytax.io, this is free, our help center, help.propertytax.io, and search online protest. We have instructions on how to file an online protest for each appraisal district. So again, I highly encourage you, if you're going to file a protest this year, to use the online appeal system and also upload your evidence at the same time that you're doing that. It's not required that you have the evidence when you file the protest. I just think that's a best practice. So there's going to be no in-person meetings, which means that written communication is super important this year. The way that you can best do that is to be organized and concise. Say exactly what you're asking for and then proceed to back it up with evidence. This is a screenshot for everyone that's dialed in. This is a screenshot of our executive summary. So in our evidence report, we provide an executive summary right up front, and we tell the appraisal district, here's my opinion of value. So they know exactly the value you're asking for. And then I'm saying I'm basing this off of a sales comparison analysis. And we have a little brief description of the sales comparison analysis that's provided in the packet. So if you're at home and you don't want to use our service to do that, you can just pop up in Microsoft Word or your favorite text editor and try to, right off the bat, here's what I'm asking for, and then here's a brief paragraph about how I arrived at that conclusion, how I arrived at that value. And then you can use the rest of the packet as the supporting evidence that you're discussing in that little initial paragraph as to why you're asking for that value. So it's not hard to do your homework, and it just makes a decision maker's job a lot easier. The biggest reward that we have is when we've helped someone who's never filed a protest, quote unquote, get in the game. The word empowerment comes up a lot repeatedly. And for us, taking the perspective of a coach, like, there's no better feeling than when somebody feels like they accomplished something on their own and they were able to do it. Maybe they were scared of the process before, or a little nervous, or they weren't so confident in what they were doing, but they got through it and they felt good. I think you saw that in the Dallas Morning News article that I referenced earlier about Leona, how she knocked off $13,000 on her value. She felt inspired and empowered by that to write a column in the Dallas Morning News about it. It is a good feeling when you go through something you've never done before, and you're going up against kind of a big, I hate this cliche, but it's like you kind of feel like a David and Goliath situation when you're in the appraisal district, and you come out winning. And really kind of the biggest secret that I have to tell everybody today is, it may seem like a David and Goliath situation, but the appraisal district doesn't act like a Goliath. Now, every once in a while, I do get that, but that's an extremely rare situation that will happen. I think for the most part that they're on, quote unquote, team lower value, but they need a reason to do that. They're concerned about fairness to everybody that they serve. And so the more tight you are with your information, the better evidence you're able to present to them, the more that they're going to help you out to lower the value. So I'm not somebody who takes the perspective that the appraisal district and the appraisal review boards are the boogeymen. I think that they're there to help you, but what you can do to help make their job easier is being very good with your evidence. So we do have a lot of free resources that I want everyone to check out if you can. The first one, you heard me reference it earlier, was our help center. It's help.propertytax.io. I know it is the domain extension is .io, so it's not .com, it's propertytax.io, just to make that clear. And then another one is a cool website that we launched this year called PropertyTaxUniversity.com. And that has 4 courses that we have with it now. And it covers basics like understanding your value. Like, so if you were questioning about what your market and appraised value is earlier on, we cover topics like that in some of our basic courses, but we kind of get more advanced in some courses called Evidence and an Appeal. And we talk about how to prepare market value evidence and things like why price per square foot is not such a great thing to use when you're valuing a property and kind of the pitfalls of that. I say price per square foot because that's a huge mistake I see a lot of people make, and the appraisal districts will always punch holes in price per square foot arguments. Going back to my earlier slides about missing adjustments and running it through their system, looking at it very differently. And so we kind of break that down in more detail in our evidence and an appeal presentation. So that's all I had for my presentation. Wade.
Wade, if you would, Wade, you can see the questions, can't you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, if you would take a look at those, I'm going to answer one because it was addressed to me, but if you'll take a look at those and direct them to Glenn or myself,
I'm looking
that
over
will probably
some right
help. So somebody asked if the slides will be available, and yes, they will. Wade can get those out to you. He has a distribution list, and that was asked early on, so I think you were probably talking about the showing time graph and maybe the hotness factor graph or chart. And then along with that, I think we had somebody in Tarrant County that wanted to know if we had those figures for Tarrant County. I don't, but if you will email me at jim@PropertyTax.io, jim@PropertyTax.io, we'll arrange to get together with a telephone conversation, and if you give me 5 minutes of your time in front of the Netris computers, I will teach you how to do this, and you'll know it'll be a tool you'll use for the rest of your realtor community. I'm assuming you're a realtor, so what else do we have, Wade?
So they asked if the slides would be available. Rena Bell.
I can do that. I can email them to you, Wade, and then this will also be recorded, so maybe you can just send that out all together.
That would be good. And then Rena asked, I saw some decreases in Tarrant in appraisal value. Do you know why? And then a follow-up question was, if the appraisal value decreased, then that means my property tax will be lower as well. So I think that's a difference of the market value versus appraisal value. So
right. You know, the way that these systems work with valuation is they look at aggregate information. And so one area might have market activity that they see that they can decrease value. You know, Tarrant County was super aggressive with values last year. Like some areas saw over 20% increase in value. So maybe they shot too far last year and they're kind of pulling it back a little bit this year with some newer market evidence to work with. And so, but that's not a good general rule to apply for all of Tarrant County, because they kind of break it down into different neighborhoods and they'll treat each neighborhood differently based on aggregate information that they collect. So that may explain why some areas saw a decrease in value. Maybe they were super aggressive last year and they're kind of dialing it back a little bit this year. And if your appraised value goes down to expect a lower tax bill, there's really two parts of the equation with your tax bill. There's the appraised, well, actually it's the taxable value, which takes your appraised value and subtracts out all the exemptions from it. So homestead, over 65, things like that. But then the other part is the tax rates. And so just because your appraised value goes down doesn't necessarily mean your tax bill will go down. It could go down, but it really depends on what they do with tax rates. So if your appraised value goes down and they keep tax rates the same, then your tax bill, or if your appraised value goes down and tax rates stay the same, your tax bill will go down. But if your appraised value goes down and the tax rates go up, it could potentially be a higher tax bill. Depends on the degree of the reduction in the appraised value. So pay attention to both sides of that. That's why I'm emphasizing tax rates so much in my presentation, because I do think that's something to watch out for. And we won't know what the tax rates are until October of this year and maybe even later. So be active on that part as well, because you can go to hearings and not hardly anybody ever pays attention to the tax rates. and they make them more open hearings. So pay attention and show up to a hearing, or you can write in an email now about it. Just pay attention to it more.
Exactly. Yeah. So the assessed value usually gets set April of May every year, and the tax rates come out in October every year. You combine the two, and that's what sets your tax bill, which is what your lender will pay for your out of your escrows, or if you're non-escrowed, you would pay it yourself. So that's how that works. And then one of the things that I always found interesting, Glenn, was they assess large areas by like whole percentages. So this area increased by 5%. That doesn't mean every single individual home appreciated exactly the same.
Right.
So I always find it interesting that if you don't protest and you just let those annual increases pile up, it compound interest is basically working against you in those cases. So
Right.
you need to get in there and protest to reset that value lower so that it doesn't, go up 5% on the higher amount. It goes up 5% the next year on the lower amount. So it's just,
I was gonna say, just to hammer that point, because that's actually a very good observation you made, and to kind of take that a little bit further. When notices come out, they're using one standard of valuation, which is based on computer modeling, aggregate information. What's the average price per square foot increase in this area for this particular kind of property? And we'll apply that to the general population of every property in that area. When you file a protest, they have to move into a different standard of valuation that says, we can't look at aggregate information anymore. We have to value your property individually. And so it makes them take a closer look at it.
yeah.
And so, that's just to kind of piggyback on your point of the benefits of filing an appeal is you get to shift from a complete database aggregate value model to an individual personalized valuation model.
Yeah. And the worst case scenario is they say no. So
Right. And the ARBs can't increase the value legally anymore. So it's risk-free.
Exactly. So I personally do it every year. I'm just saying, I think everyone should. I don't want to pay a single cent more in taxes than I need to. And Jim and Glenn have been awesome to work with over the years and have saved me, frankly, a ton of money. So I'm appreciative. So thank you, fellas.
Glenn, there's a couple of questions about how we do the charges at PropertyTax.io.
Okay.
And I know that you talked about the silver program. And I know that Wade, of course, is one of our partners. Matter of fact, Wade, you are our first partner in here.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's right.
Which is not a surprise to anybody. If you know Wade, he knows how to align himself with the right people and network, and he's a pro at it. So Wade was our first partner. So Glenn, explain a little bit about that, if you would. What's the benefit of using Wade's promo code and his link?
Right.
And also, someone kind of piggyback question to that. If somebody just doesn't want to do this themselves, and a lot of people don't, is there a solution where they can just turn it over to us? And I know there is, because we do Wade's every year, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Right. So our normal cost for the silver package, which is what I was demoing a lot this year in the presentation, that's $75. But with partners like Wade, we offer going through Wade using his promo code or his unique link, you get $10 off. So it brings the price down to $65. And I also saw another question that was kind of related to that about our average reduction. That varies depending on the appraisal district. And in general, people say in this North Texas area, our median savings was $450. So you'd pay $65 and save $450 in taxes. And you can compare that to what a normal consultant would charge, which is a percentage of savings. Mm-hmm. Some of them charge 50% or 40%. And I'm just telling you, a lot of them don't have nearly the kind of evidence or the power of the punch that you would have using our tool to get the reduction. So it's significantly cheaper than hiring a consultant. But also, to now answer another question, is if you are willing to pay a percentage of the savings, then yes, you can for sure hire us to do that for you. And we handle it. We charge 40% of the tax savings. It's the first year's tax savings. So we don't charge it into perpetuity. And another key thing I think that differentiates how we charge from some other people that are out there is we take into account all the exemptions and everything like that, and the actual specific tax rates for your property. I'm saying that also is kind of a, if you hire me or not to do it, that's, whatever. But if you're going to shop around, which is fine, you guys should shop around, there's going to be other fees that you see out there. And some of them, just pay attention, because some of them don't take into account exemptions or your specific tax rates. And so it's not going to be a true percentage of the savings. So just question that. Just ask a simple question. What's the formula you use to calculate my tax savings? And if they can't answer that question kind of how I just answered it, then look in a little bit closer. There's a lot of firms that charge the way that we do, that are upfront, honest about it, but there are some out there that are pretty big that don't charge that way.
Interesting.
Glenn, what happens if somebody buys the report and they work it up and send it in, and they don't get anything off of it?
Right.
Tell us about. I know there's a guarantee, so explain what they have to do and all that.
Yeah, so we do guarantee results or your money back. I can't guarantee a reduction. I can't guarantee that you're automatically going to get a reduction if you use our report, but we feel strongly that our evidence is credible, and that's why our instant and free analysis is really for us to kind of be upfront and honest with you about what the expectation is. There's a lot of people that go to our site that we actually recommend don't make a purchase because we don't think the evidence is there. If you can't tell from the presentation that I gave, we're a very evidence-driven company, and so if the evidence isn't there, then when I say evidence, I mean like market sales. There are other ways that you can get a reduction using condition issues like foundation repairs and things like that. But all we have to analyze is recent sales, unless you tell us other things. So we'll tell you up front if we think we can help you or not. And if you don't get a reduction at the appraisal review board hearing, then no questions asked, we refund the purchase. And on the percentage of savings, again, if you hired us to handle it outright, that's just tied to success. So it's never going to cost you money using our service. Essentially,
You always come out ahead. You're either getting it done for you and you're only paying a percentage of the savings, which is what I personally do, or you pay for the report and you only pay for that if you get savings. And of course, you're saving more than the report's costing. So you're always coming out ahead.
Right.
So Glenn, there was one more question about, he didn't catch the part about the adjustment value and was curious if there was a place to see values DCAD places on different components of properties such as pools, etc. I'll let you field that one.
Yeah, that's, so actually I give Dallas DCAD. So when you say DCAD, I know you're a Dallas person. DCAD stands for Dallas Central Appraisal District, for anyone who doesn't know what that means. DCAD is actually really good about placing all of their files that they use for valuation online in a nice zip file. So if you have some computer skills and you can sift through files and kind of join stuff together, if you've worked with databases, you could find that information. They don't make it available publicly on the website. They just say this property has a pool, or this property has a detached garage and it's 400 square feet, but they don't tell you the value that's associated with it. Because our program does all those open records requests and everything, we display all that information on our website and in our evidence packets. But on DCAD, they don't show the actual, and actually some appraisal districts don't even show you certain information that's crucial to valuing the property, like the building quality rating. Like I know that Collin County doesn't display the building quality rating on their website. You can only get that through public records. So there's a lot of hidden information. I say hidden, there's a lot of information that's not obvious that impacts the value of your property.
Hard to find.
And you can hard to find. You can only get it through open records requests. And so we've become masters at that.
Glenn, another question for you. You mentioned that last year Tarrant, I think you said Tarrant increased values as much as 20%. It was Tarrant, right?
Right.
So this year, if I am in Tarrant County and I didn't get an increase, normally if I don't get an increase, I don't protest. Is it possible that maybe they just way overshot me last year and I'm still high? I mean, talk about what if you didn't get a value increase, should you still protest?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not of the camp, everyone file a protest gung-ho every year. I think that everyone needs to pay attention to it every year. I think everyone needs to consider filing a protest every year, even if your value doesn't get increased, because I mean, I've just seen it time and time again. You know, I represent a lot of people personally, and we send notifications out, and common response I get back is, hey, it looks like they didn't increase my value. Is it worth filing a protest this year? And my response is always the same. It's, you know, we have to look at the evidence. What does the evidence tell us? Is there evidence we can work with to get it reduced? Maybe we have a sale that's really good to use this year that indicates a lower value that we didn't have available to us last year. And we kind of had to work with a little lesser quality of data set last year that supported a higher value or whatnot. And so, and I, you know, constantly we're surprising people by, they send us an email in May saying, my value didn't go up. Is it worth filing a protest? And we say, yeah, we'll have a look at it. And then they get surprised, you know, a month and a half later when we send them the results, and they end up saving $1,000 in taxes because we have better evidence to work with. So it's absolutely paramount that you look at it every year and try to squeeze it as much as you can. It's really how the system is supposed to work, because you're supposed to be a check on the appraisal district's value. And if you're just kind of letting it slide and not doing it, then you could have that value creep that Wade was talking about earlier that you're going to be paying for multiple years, it compounding. And, right, you know, we're also seeing in some areas where they don't increase values. And so think about if you missed an opportunity to get a reduction last year and you didn't do anything, and then they just rolled values in your area. That is, and maybe this year they have the evidence to increase values, but because they're limited with time and effort, they choose not to revalue a specific neighborhood. That happened in my neighborhood. I know that where I live, they probably had some market evidence they could have worked with to increase values, but they, you know, in Dallas, they had too much other things to concentrate on. So they kind of rolled our values last year. And so if you took action the year before that, now you're getting 2 years of benefit from getting a reduction.
Gotcha. Exactly. It's also often one of the only ways a consumer can control a portion of their monthly mortgage payment as well. Yes. Because if most families have fixed interest rate loans, so the principal and interest portion of their payment is not going to change from one year to the next, but the taxes and insurance will. So if you're not proactively looking at your tax bill as a part of your strategy, you're missing out on some big savings. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Glenn, I know you stress this, but I think I was reading a question and I want to make sure it's worth talking about twice. What is the benefit of requesting the district's information or their evidence that they're going to use? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I'm glad that we circled back to that, because I should have emphasized that more in the hearing or in the presentation I gave. Requesting the appraisal district's evidence is not used nearly as much as it should be. The reason being is that the appraisal district legally has to provide that evidence to you 14 days prior to your hearing. And what that does is it locks them into that set of evidence. They cannot alter that evidence from that point forward. And so you get a chance to see their cards before the hearing. A lot of people, you know, a lot of what makes people nervous in this process a lot of times is just not being confident about what, you know, is the appraisal district going to be able to pull some stunt in the hearing? Are they going to be able to use their systems and overpower me with, you know, all the, you know, I'm going into their house, you know, it's an away game and they've got the advantage. And so what you can do is essentially, you know, imagine you're playing football and you're doing an away. I'm referencing it because I was a football player, but you're going to an away game, but you steal 2 weeks in advance the opponent's playbook, and you're looking through it. You know all the plays that they're going to run, and you can prepare your defense exactly for what they're going to do. You know that secret little trick play that they plan on running on 3rd and 2. You know, and so you can set up the defense and stop them. And, you know, so that's essentially what requesting their evidence does. The benefit is, let's say that you submitted evidence on your online appeal. You can change your evidence all the way up until the ARB hearing. And so you've got essentially 14 days to alter your strategy based on the evidence that they present. And that's exactly what happened in the case study that I showed, where he requested the appraisal district's evidence and he was able to beat it up. And he saw that they were using two comps that had pools, and one comp was valuing at $4,000. And he got pictures of the pools and prepared an awesome defense against it. And so, and that's what won him the case, was being able to prepare by requesting the appraisal district's evidence. So I can't emphasize that enough, that when you have their evidence, that really opens up what you're able to do to prepare. I was a little distracted because I saw my mom going in the background there. If everyone saw that. So everyone say hi to Connie Goodrich.
Okay. Yeah.
We had two more questions come in, Jim, actually.
Okay.
So this is a great one. Someone asked, how do you address the tax value on a new construction property? So how would you handle that? Because in my world, on the lending side, it's always difficult to assess the taxes on year one, because a lot of times the builder is assessing or crediting based off of lot value.
Right.
Whereas we, the lender, have to basically collect escrows on improved value.
Right. Well, one of the things that an appraiser has to do in the appraisal report is estimate the property taxes. And so we always use a tax rate, the latest tax rate that we can, and multiply that by whatever our appraised value is, which in most cases is going to be pretty close to the sales price. Mm-hmm. But you can get into an escrow nightmare when you're buying new construction and the escrow account is not set up right. And I don't even need to ask Wade if he sets it up right. I can guarantee you it's set up right, at least to the extent he can control it. And so,
exactly.
I don't know, anything to add to that, Glenn? I think you had that situation in your house. Actually had the reverse, didn't you? Because they actually dropped the tax rate when you bought a new house.
Right. Yeah. Because the statewide school school finance bill kicked in, and Dallas had to reduce their tax rate, but they got supplemented with state funds for that. So we actually, our mortgage actually dropped $500, or I mean, our annual mortgage dropped $500 because of that.
Okay.
But also going back on the new construction part with the appraisal district, it also depends on the percent complete that it was on January 1st of that year. So let's say that you moved in April, but you still had, you were still maybe 70% complete on January 1st. That could impact, even though you're escrowing as if it's fully done, your tax bill could actually be less because it was only 70% complete. So that might be another instance where you have a little bit left over in the escrow.
Okay. And just so we don't forget this, I want to circle back. Forrest had a question about requesting evidence. I don't think we covered how to get that evidence. So if you file online, you can get it. You can ask for that at the same time, can't you?
Depends on the appraisal district that you're in. If you're in Collin, Denton, I don't know, because they changed online data providers this year. So I don't have inside information on their protest process, but I'm guessing in Denton you can also do this, where you can check a box when you file an online protest to request the appraisal district's evidence. In Dallas, I don't think that they have that available in the online protest, but if I'm wrong about that, please let me know. So that the way that you would do that, if you can't do it online, is that you would have to mail in a written request for that and just say, I'm requesting, here's my property address. If you know the account number that the appraisal district has associated with that property, identify that account number and just write a simple paragraph. I'm requesting the appraisal district's evidence required by the tax code 14 days prior to my hearing, and maybe give the hearing date and everything like that on there. And then they'll have to mail it to you by certified mail 14 days prior to the hearing.
Okay, and how close to your hearing can you do that? I mean, obviously you can't do it the day before.
No, you have to do it before that 14 days. And so that's why we request doing it as soon as you file the appeal.
Gotcha.
Because another thing that does is when you file the protest, they'll immediately try to schedule you for a hearing as soon as available. And so if you request the evidence, that might buy you a little bit more time before your hearing, is because then they say, okay, we can't schedule this person because we haven't fulfilled their request yet. And so that might buy you a little bit more time. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to request the appraisal district's evidence because it has multiple advantages doing that.
Okay, you haven't covered this. I want to make sure we covered it. You can protest under two scenarios usually. The market
Right.
value, which is what you've been talking about, and also the equal and uniform, sometimes called equity, where you compare your houses with your neighbors. That's a little tricky to do. I know the software will do it for you, but should you not bother with equal and uniform if you don't understand it and just protest market?
I don't want to be that extreme with it. Where I want to caution a lot of people is when they look at their, like a single neighbor, they look at maybe their direct next door neighbor and they divide their square footage and get a price per square foot. And they say, oh, their price per square foot is lower than mine. And I'm going to use that as a basis to get a reduction. If that's all you're going in off of or something similar to that, what the appraisal district's going to do is they're going to say, well, the proper way of doing equal and uniform is to use a reasonable number of comps. And so reasonable is certainly going to be more than one comp. And they're going to pull in other comps from your neighborhood and they're going to apply all those adjustments to it. Again, this is why price per square foot is not a good indicator. They're going to apply all those adjustments to it and then arrive at a median. And I'm just telling you, like, more times than not, I see that median come in pretty much right at what your notice is. Because keep in mind also that they value the whole neighborhood. So if they're off on the market value of your property, it's likely that they could be off on every single property's market value in your neighborhood. So if you're just comparing the price per square foot of a neighboring property, you might be using too high of a value when you're ignoring the data set of sales that are out there. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can certainly file you can certainly file with equal and uniform, but just from my experience, it's not nearly as successful as what people originally think that they're going to do when they file the protest. It usually finds some sort of way to turn it on its head.
But there's no harm in checking that also. No. And then sometimes, I know I don't do much of the residential, but sometimes you get overloaded and I have to help you out. Sometimes the staff will actually look at it equity and say equal and uniform and say, well, we can do a little bit here. And so
you can get maybe a couple of $1,000 off here and there for it, but
no downside to it though.
There's no downside to it. I'm just warning people of hanging your hat on that and not going any further with research. Basically pay attention to sales also.
Okay. So what else do we have, Wade?
There was a follow-up question to the new construction on so essentially, if the home was 100% on January 1st, what evidence can they use to help reduce the tax value? So essentially, the home was complete, it's fully assessed, it's a normal rebuttal at that point, I would think.
So it depends on a lot of times if it's a new construction, some of the builders don't put that information in MLS. And so the appraisal districts will guess at what you paid for it. And sometimes they're high and sometimes they're low. If they're high, then just submit your HUD-1 from your closing documents and you can get the value reduced to what you paid for it. If they're low, I don't really see much of a way for you to go to get a reduction because now your only option would be, they're going to say, well, what did you pay for it? And then you're going to have to say, oh, I don't want to show you that. Or if you do show them that, then they know that you paid more for it. And that might just put a little marker in your file for next year to increase the value because we think we're too low on it. So sometimes your best play is to just kind of lay low if you don't think there's any information out there that can help you get it reduced, because you might actually, I'm not saying that they will target you, but why take the opportunity to give somebody knowledge that they have you assessed below what you paid?
Yeah. Only share data that benefits you.
Right. As is your right as a taxpayer.
Right.
The only thing I would add to that is sometimes people get carried away on new construction, adding extras and putting personalized things into a house. And as an appraiser, sometimes somebody might be paying $500,000 for a house, but it may only appraise at $475,000. And you're going to have that appraisal. You could take the appraisal in and say, look, I'm willing to be taxed on what it's worth, not what I paid for it. And we got an appraiser that looked at it and went out there and spent a half day working this up, and they said $475,000, and that's what I want. So, that's a possibility. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes that's a play as well.
And if you've got that evidence, again, there's no harm in pushing further because the ARB can't increase the value to what you paid for it. So if you're in that circumstance where you've got an appraisal that comes in lower, then that's good evidence that can work in your advantage to get the value lower. And I would encourage you to push for that.
Yeah, right now with all of the refinances that we're doing, we're having some people who are much more highly opinionated about how high their property would appraise for. And the reality is some of those are coming in lower right now. But I'm basically telling them, keep that handy because any day now you're going to get your notice of assessed value. And if the assessment is higher than what the actual appraisal came back at, you can use that to fight your property taxes. So it's just a way to make lemonade out of lemons sometimes if the timing works out. You know, there's shelf lives to appraisals as well. So you can't just say, I got my property appraised in October of last year and, you know, in 19 and now here in 2020, it's still the same. Who knows about that? But if it's right around the same time period, a lot of my clients are using that appraisal if it benefits them. If it doesn't benefit them, they're not sharing. And I would recommend that you do the same. So I think that's all of the questions in the chat box. Whoop, hold on. I spoke too soon. Homestead exemption applies to all three area ISDs, city and county. So
Okay.
homestead exemption, if you file for that, you have to be the owner of record January 1 of each year or of the first year. And what does that actually do for somebody?
Right. So it's required by law in Texas that the ISD with a homestead has to be $25,000. So you automatically get $25,000 off if it's your homestead on the ISD. They can do an optional above that. So like in Dallas, they do an optional, I think, of 10% in addition to that.
Right.
The cities are not required by law and the counties are not required by law to do the homestead exemption. And so the only relief you have there is if they choose to self-impose an exemption offered. And so that really depends on the city that you're in. Some cities do it. A lot of cities don't do it. And the same thing with over 65 exemptions that over 65 will only freeze by law, only has to freeze your ISD taxes. It doesn't have to freeze your total tax bill. But like there are cities like Plano, so the city of Plano offers an over 65 tax freeze, which is very rare. I hardly ever see a city do that. So a lot of these questions about exemptions, pay attention to, there is no good general rule I can offer other than the ISD required by state has to offer a $25,000 reduction. Anywhere else, it's kind of anyone's game at that.
Yeah, and it's a reduction off of the assessed value, not off of the dollar for dollar tax bill. So
exactly.
I've had some people, disabled veterans in particular, because I specialize in veterans, military mortgage boot camp there. But my point is that I've got some disabled veterans that will file the disability exemption as well. And your disability rating impacts the amount of property taxes that you can save as well. But unless you're really 100% disabled, it's not a significant amount. So of course, file your exemptions. Yeah, file your homestead exemption, file your over 65 if you're over 65. And if you're a disabled veteran, file that as well. Only the homestead exemption do you have to be the owner of record as of January 1st of that year. The other exemptions, the over 65 and VA disability, you can file as soon as you're the owner of record with the county. So do that sooner rather than later.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. We don't talk about exemptions a whole lot, and I'm glad that you asked that question because there are a lot of people out there, believe it or not, that don't have their homestead when they should. So, maybe take this information and make sure everyone in your neighborhood's aware. Everyone got their homestead,
Exactly. So that's good information. So we got some thank yous and whatnot. Jim, did you have anything else?
I don't think so, Wade. We certainly appreciate the chance to jump on with you and hope it was beneficial.
Yeah, no, it was great. I even learned some stuff when we talked. Jim and Glenn are a wealth of knowledge on this. So if you're interested in going it alone, at least browse their website with those free tools that they provided. I'm telling you, the cost to use their service is a drop in the bucket as to what you're going to save. And like I mentioned, it's one of the only pieces that you can control on your mortgage payment. And so you need to be looking at this on a regular basis. So if there's anything any of us can do to help, by all means, please track us down. We'd be honored to do so. And we just really appreciate your time today, both of you, and to our attendees. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. We'll let you go. We'll be back in touch. If you have any questions, just hit us up, okay?
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.